Hey, what is going on, all you bus nuts, geeks, and enthusiasts out there? Welcome to another episode of Motorcoach World. My name is James. Since I've started this channel, I've gotten so many messages from viewers from several different countries saying that my channel has inspired them to get a job as a motorcoach operator. Well, for those of you who have messaged me, I just want to say that I am so honored and humbled by sitting here on an empty bus once a week talking about, well, motor coaches have helped some of you decide on whether or not to try this out as a career. So I hope with all my heart that it's working out for those of you who have reached out to me and that you guys aren't regretting your decision. One of the other things that viewers who have decided to go for it and become motor coach operators have asked me over and over again was, what should I look out for? What should I expect? Is there anything I should know about before starting my motor coach operator career? Well, usually when I see these comments, I try to reply right away, and I usually do it via the comments or through private messaging. But today I figured I'd do a video to cover this question since I get them so frequently. Now, in the past, I've done a video on what it's like to be a motor coach operator, which I'll post a link to that video down in the description box below. Also, it should be popping up here somewhere. Definitely check that video out if you guys haven't seen it. But when a motor coach operator in training asks me the question of what they should know before becoming an operator, I usually don't tell them the stuff that they're going to be learning already during training. Instead, I usually like to tell them stories on things that's happened to me, things that's frustrated me throughout my career. See, these are things that motor coach operators will usually discover on their own as they gain more and more experience within the industry. And these are things that will differ depending on the person. So to be more specific, I'm talking about ideas and expectations that people tend to develop about their jobs over time due to, again, experience or more so actually lack of experience. So with that said, guys, today I'm going to tell you guys a couple of tales from my younger days, certain expectations that I formed on my own from a combination of miscommunication and a lack of experience or understanding on how the industry actually works. Today, we're going to talk about a few toxic expectations that almost ruined my career in the motor coach industry. So whenever a new driver comes on board, I always like to tell them that one of the worst things you can do to yourself as a motor coach operator, especially if you're driving charter groups, is to have the expectation of being home by a certain time. Now, despite having group itineraries for the day and planning out your route and schedule, in the world of transportation, I've learned to always expect the unexpected. So the story begins once back when I was 26-year-old driving for a different motor coach company while finishing my degree. It was summertime, so I had no classes, and I opened up my availability to dispatch and basically went wherever they sent me. I mean, for a single college student with no expectations at home, it was exciting and an adventurous lifestyle. Well, one day, dispatch had put me on a day trip, taking a group of foreign agriculture visitors on a farm tour of Illinois, finishing with a giant pig and corn roast dinner gathering at a farm. We have a lot of corn here in Illinois, in case you guys didn't know. Well, anyway, after doing my homework for the trip and planning out all the routes for all the places they were going to, based on the itinerary, I was supposed to be home by 7 p.m. Well, it just so happened that I asked a girl that I had been interested in for a date, and that night she agreed to meet me for a late dinner downtown at 8 p.m. and wanted me to pick her up at 7:45. Well, in my mind, it was all perfect. You see, it just so happens that my group's drop-off location on campus was just a block away from my date's apartment. Well, in case you guys haven't guessed already what my plan was for that night, I was actually going to drop my group off and then show up to my date's apartment in this giant $500,000 chariot. You know, impress her with a ride back to the bus terminal, finish my post-trip and paperwork, and head out to dinner. I mean, come on, how many college-age guys have the opportunity to show up to a date driving a motor coach? Well, anyway, waiting for my group at the dinner party at this beautiful farmhouse, which was an hour away from home, by the way, I checked my watch and noticed it was already 6 p.m. Now, I got a little antsy, but understood that it usually took a while for large groups of people to stumble out of a party like this, so I thought, hey, no big deal. Well, by the time 6:30 p.m. came around, I started wondering if I was gonna make it home on time. Making matters worse, my date was texting me and telling me how excited she was to hang out this evening. Well, the group didn't actually get on the bus until 7 p.m., which was the time I should have already been arriving at home. Being an hour away, I thought I could make up the time on the interstate. Well, on the way home, there was a huge traffic jam because of an accident between a semi and a car. Now, looking back at my callow young self at that point, I admit I was definitely not in the frame of mind to be operating a 45-foot motor coach full of passengers. Not only did my passengers feel rushed by a hormone-driven 26-year-old driver,
oh my,
they also noticed that my calm and professional demeanor throughout the day had changed to an antsy, impatient driver.
hold power!
Actually, at some point, the group leader, who was actually really happy with my performance throughout the day, came up to the driver's seat and asked me if I was doing okay. I nervously smiled at her and replied,
"Everything's perfectly all right now. We're fine. We're all fine here now. Thank you. How are you?"
But I think she knew better. I kept pulling out my phone to check to see if my date had texted me, and at some point I texted her that I was stuck in traffic and apologized profusely. Now keep in mind, guys, this was back in the day when holding a phone in your hand while driving wasn't that much of an issue yet, not like it is today, but still, it should not have been done and it was still really unsafe. Now, it also didn't help that I kept telling her that I would just be a few minutes late, which became more and more of a lie with every minute going by as we inched our way through the traffic jam. Well, let's just say that not only did my date cancel on me by the time I got my group to the drop-off location, but for the last part of my charter trip as a professional motor coach driver, I did not belong in that driver's seat with the mindset that I was in.
In range?
Not yet, sir.
Come on, come on.
She'll fly apart.
Fly apart then.
Now, for some time after that trip, I also kind of subconsciously blamed my job, as well as the company I drove for losing out on that date that night. I started adopting a really negative attitude. I remember thinking how crappy this job was and why I didn't get a job where I could just go home when it was time to go home. Well, eventually I did get over it. I realized the answer to my own question was that I would never be happy sitting in a cubicle somewhere processing reports all day long or standing behind a cash register checking people out. Now, I also became a little wiser after that experience and understood that my frustrations was misplaced and it was not my job or my company's fault that I didn't get home on time. I would say that out of all the charters I've ever driven, about 80% of them got me back home at the time the itinerary had stated. But the rest of the time I either got home much later or in some cases actually much earlier. But the lesson I want you guys to take away from this if you're planning to be a motor coach operator one day is that if you as a motor coach operator make plans on a day you have to drive, make sure it's not something really, really important. You will drive yourself crazy and make not only yourself, but your friends and loved ones, as well as your paying customers and the passengers, miserable if you put yourself in this position. The best thing to do is not to make any plans on the day you're driving, or if you have something really important coming up, make sure you're not working that day. I mean, request it off, tell dispatch that you can't work. But don't do it last minute because that really screws up dispatch as well. Again, back when I was in my mid-20s, walking across the bus yard for the first time as a newly minted motor coach operator, seeing all the different sizes and types of vehicles parked there was mesmerizing. I couldn't wait to get my hands on every one of them and experience how each of them drove. But being my first day, I climbed aboard the old 1992 MCI DL3 that I was assigned to for the day. Based on the smirks and glares I got from all the other techs and bus operators in the yard, I could tell that this was everyone's first choice when it came to their pick of equipment. That was sarcasm, by the way. It was a bus that nobody liked driving. Now, I honestly didn't care that I was assigned to an old coach in the fleet. I drove it with pride and made my passengers happy that day, getting them from point A to point B. Well, I was still in the honeymoon phase of my motor coach career. But aside from just me, it doesn't take long for drivers to start to develop a taste of what they like to drive and what they don't. And regardless of whether a bus company assigns a coach to a driver for the long term or by the day, you will always hear some drivers talk about how they hate being assigned to a particular coach, and sometimes it's enough to create a very toxic attitude. Well, I primarily drove scheduled line runs when I started out, and on days that passenger counts were low, we were actually assigned to drive vans instead of a motor coach. Now, aside from being smaller and not having a restroom, the vans were actually just fine to get the job done, as drivers have driven these vans for decades before me. But for me personally, I signed on because of my love of driving motor coaches, and I was very disappointed on days that I was assigned a van instead of a coach bus. Also, on some days, I would even take a peek at how many tickets were sold on my run. And if the numbers were close enough, I would actually go as far as purchasing a few tickets using my own money for my upcoming run, just so that the van would be upgraded to a motor coach. Now, eventually management caught on to what I was doing, and I kind of had to stop and just go with the flow and drive a van on days that we were slow. But when it comes down to the management side of things in the transportation industry, it all boils down to a very simple bottom line. To make money in the transportation industry, you need to first spend a lot of money to buy your fleet. You also need paying passengers to purchase tickets or charter your vehicles in your fleet. And finally, you need to hire and pay people to drive your fleet. And when all that is said and done, in the end, what you charge your passengers need to be more than what you're paying out of your pocket. Otherwise, you go broke. But whether you're running an airline, a bus company, or even a fleet of cruise ships, if you don't follow the simple guidelines I just mentioned, your company will cease to exist. However, sitting in the driver's seat, especially me as a young driver, I was clueless as to how things work and what the managers did in the office every day. And to me, sometimes it just seemed so unfair and even infuriating when I got assigned a van or even a bus that I didn't like driving. And sometimes I even made my bosses aware of my frustrations. But a very patient and wise manager approached me one day and explained to me that drivers are hired to move the company's equipment around. It's what's needed for the company to survive. Managers are hired to make sure that all the equipment is sound and the drivers are properly trained and licensed to operate the equipment. With a fleet of 60 buses and 120 drivers, someone will always end up with a vehicle that they don't like, but they're still paid to move it. Some days that's you, and some days it's not. So after that conversation, at that point it all clicked and I got a much better understanding of the purpose of my job and what my role was within the company. Now, I still got assigned to buses and vehicles I didn't like to drive after that, but the talk made it a lot easier to swallow afterwards. Also, let me just add that at no time did the company I worked for back then force me to drive anything that was unsafe and not DOT compliant. If you as a driver are working for a company that is asking you to drive anything that is not safe for passengers or is not DOT compliant, I would find a different company to drive for. Because in the end, it's just not worth it to put you and your passengers' lives in jeopardy. So folks, this one was kind of for all the new drivers out there, and I hope it can help with some misguided frustrations of the job. And keep in mind, no matter what you do and where you work, every place is going to have these kind of issues. Also keep in mind that aside from these two stories that I told you guys today, there were many, many more instances of issues and scenarios that I went through that almost made me quit my job as a motor coach operator. I just don't have time to tell you guys every one of them in these 15 minutes, nor do I think you guys would actually want to listen to all of them. I guess the best way to describe what I've learned is that there's no such thing out there as a perfect dream job. I mean, no matter what you end up doing as a career, there will always be days where you'll want to quit and never come back. And there'll also be days where you can't imagine doing anything else.
An ale for me. And for my officers. In fact, ales for everyone.
You truly know that you have your dream job when you realize that no matter how bad it gets, you keep coming back to it, and that you're willing to deal with the bad days instead of just walking away. So folks, I hope you liked today's video. Please remember to hit that like and subscribe button if you did. There's always that thumbs down button if you didn't. Also, don't forget to check out Motorcoach World's Facebook page, as well as my Patreon page. And finally, don't forget to check out Motorcoach World's merch, all of which will be linked down in the description box below. And as always, friends, if you're watching this, then you are part of the Motorcoach World.